End of the season, which means it's prospect time. We'll talk some prospects, what's to watch for the Amerks playoffs, and all that's ahead for the young guns for the Sabres. Hadi Kalakeche joins the show coming up next.
You're Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day and making us your first listen every day. Also on our YouTube channel where you can get us. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Joe DiBiase, and I am joined today on the show by Hadi Kalakeche. He rejoins the show, I should say. Director of North American Scouting for DobberProspects. He's got a shiny new title since the last time he was on the show. Habs, of course, for Eyes on the Prize. What's up, Hadi? How you doing today?
Doing good. The draft's right around the corner. Playoffs are on. The U18s are on. Lots of stuff going on, but I've always got some time to come on and talk prospects with you.
Always, this guy's always watching for the U18s. How? Where do you even watch the U18s?
I've got my secrets,
Okay.
but mainly on the NHL Network, that kind of thing.
Sure.
We'll play on the US games. I find my ways.
Sure. We'll talk plenty of Sabre prospects today on the show. High-profile names like Matthew Savoie and Jiri Kulich and, of course, Isak Rosen. We've got guys that, how close are they to the NHL? Last time Hadi was on, he talked up Noah Ostlund a lot. The goalie situation with Devon Levi. We'll get to all of the Sabre prospects coming up on today's show. By the way, you can follow Hadi on Twitter at Hadi, H-A-D-I, the letter K, and then _ scouting for all your prospect needs. So let's start, though, with just kind of an overall big picture of how you see the landscape for the Sabres and how they compare across the NHL. I very commonly will see them ranked super high on these prospect lists. I saw a future ranking the other day, like what will the standings look like in 3 years? And the Sabres are 8th. You know, in in an exercise like that, they rank very favorably. And it seems to usually be because people consider them to have one of the better prospect pools in the league. Is that the sentiment that you agree with?
Definitely, yeah. I'd say they're in the top 5, top 10 kind of conversation in terms of prospects pools in the league. It's just the amount of high picks that you guys have not only kind of traded for, but also retained, which is really important. I feel like one big thing the Sabres have been big on is making sure that their top 64 is filled with at least 3, hopefully 4, maybe even 5 picks, which is really, really useful when you're trying to rebuild and create a contender, because you've got guys in the pool like Jiri Kulich, like Noah Ostlund, guys like that who were selected with picks that weren't necessarily the teams. And you get great value out of those guys. You know, I feel like the center line, especially for the Sabres, is really strong in their prospect pool. You know, the defense is kind of barren, but honestly, the forward core is so strong. And with the additions of Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power in recent years, I feel like the defense is young enough that you can compensate for the lack of defense in your prospect pool, which you've already got in the NHL. I feel like the core defensively is already set up. It's just a matter of plugging in more and more players each year. And I feel like this year is a really, really good draft year in order to add some high-end talent, some top 6 talent, that kind of thing. But I feel like the Sabres would be kind of very much, they would benefit very much from adding a defenseman in this year's draft, because there aren't many in the kind of top 10 range, but from 10 to 20, I've got 5-ish of them. So it's a pretty good range for them to be picking in order to get a good defenseman.
And we'll get to some NHL draft talk, but you're right. I mean, the only guy in the pipeline at all, maybe, that you would project as an NHLer is Ryan Johnson, and he might not even sign. Yeah. So he might not even be a part of the organization. So we'll see. And we will get to some draft stuff. The Sabres slotted to pick 13th. How about young guys, rookie campaigns? You mentioned Owen Power, and you know, I think the consensus is in on him already that he's going to be a core piece of this team for years to come. Kevin Adams is already talking about locking him up, which is crazy. But they signed their guys super early, so I guess the trend is there. How about Jack Quinn and JJ Peterka for you? They both were inconsistent, it seemed, year one. But Sabre fans, I think they did enough to have Sabre fans believing that these guys really can be top 6 wingers for a long time.
For sure. Definitely Jack Quinn has brought a side to his game that I wasn't really kind of high on in his draft year. I felt like his playmaking was pretty kind of bang average. He was mainly a trigger man, a scorer, and it was mainly Marco Rossi setting up his chances for the Ottawa 67s. That's why I was utterly shocked when Quinn was picked ahead of Rossi.
Yep.
But the things that Quinn has added to his game in the recent years have really been really impressive. His ability to kind of delay his passes, to hit seams, just the compete level as well has come 2-3 steps ahead. I feel like he's really upped his game since he's kind of started his rookie year, and you even saw some progress throughout this year. So that just speaks to the level of kind of adaptability that Quinn's capable of. And yeah, he's been really impressive. I think that he's for sure a top 6 winger in the future. Peterka, I see more as a middle 6 type of guy, the kind of guy who's going to oscillate between being a complement on a second line or being the main guy on a third line, that kind of thing. Mainly the defensive elements of his game have always been kind of solid or above average. But he's brought his offensive game up a couple steps. I still think that on a second line, he's probably kind of the complementary piece rather than the central kind of element. But on a third line, he's definitely the main guy, stringing together plays, making plays defensively, dominating transitions, that kind of thing.
Sure. That's totally right. That's how I see Peterka as well. And he might figure for a long time to play with that Dylan Cousins, Jack Quinn line, which is what the line was all year. And to me, that's exactly how what his role is on that team. Cousins drives a lot of play. Quinn is a trigger man, but of course did more so carrying possession as well. But you're right, like Peterka, like sometimes he'll take it coast to coast, but he doesn't really need to, it feels like, on that line.
No, for sure. Exactly.
Yeah. How about guys that are on their way as we kind of transition to players that are in the system? Who's the closest to you? It's funny. They were the youngest team in hockey this year by a wide margin.
Yep.
They're probably going to be younger next year. Like even honestly, you just take out Craig Anderson, plug in Devon Levi. I mean, right there, that's a 20-year difference almost between the two. So
absolutely.
The average goes down just with that. But Adams talked about Jiri Kulich and Matthew Savoie. I guess how realistic is it for you that one, both, or maybe even somebody else from the pipeline is ready to step into the lineup next year in Buffalo?
The way I see it, Jiri Kulich is going to be in the NHL next year. He's proven that he's capable of managing the pro level really well. I feel like for him, the difference between the Czech League and the AHL wasn't as big as it would be for other prospects. He's transitioned seamlessly. His defensive game has always been, I was saying this back in his draft year, he was a top 2, top 3 defensive player in his draft year. So the defensive side of his game was already kind of at a level where he would be able to transition to, playing any type of role on a pro team. Because if his offense isn't clicking, he can fall back on that defensive game and still be an impactful player, which is something that a lot of coaches look for, right? Like a lot of coaches will be like, if you're not scoring, what are you giving me? And Kulich gives you a lot when he's not scoring. But even better than that is just his ability to rack up points, to find the back of the net. He had a tremendous World Juniors. I feel like he's definitely going to get a shot, and I feel like he's good enough that he will be able to stick and prove to his coaches that, I belong in the NHL, which is saying something, given that he was picked in the late 20s. He wasn't, a top 10 pick, the type of guy that you'd expect to be there in the draft +1. But he's definitely going to be able to make it. So that's one guy. I feel like Savoie still needs some AHL time just to iron out some deficiencies in his game. One thing I mentioned in our last podcast was that as soon as there's 2 guys pressuring him, he kind of panics and doesn't know really what to do with the puck. A lot of his plays are kind of precipitated, throws pucks on the net when there's pressure on him, that kind of thing. So just, upping the pressure 2-3 levels, going from the WHL to the AHL, would kind of be a good transition for him rather than just going straight to the NHL from the dub, where the pressure, the defensive pressure you face is maybe 10-15 times higher, right? It's so suffocating playing against NHL defenders, and you have such little space that I'd rather see Savoie get some time, but his skill set's undeniable. I mean, he's got a wicked shot. He's got great playmaking. When he's got open ice, he manages it really well. So I feel like he's also a guy who could get a shot. He's definitely gonna kind of work through the preseason and try to kind of carve out a role for himself. But I feel like the best decision to make sure that Savoie hits the way he should is to play him in the NHL at least a year, in the AHL at least a year, maybe 2.
Yeah. And he could be one of those guys that gets that 9-game look at the beginning of the year, but we'll see what ends up happening for Matthew Savoie. Other prospects to get to: Noah Ostlund, Isak Rosen, and we'll get to the goaltending situation as well as what's coming up in the NHL draft, all ahead with Hadi Kalakeche from DobberProspects and Eyes on the Prize covering the Montreal Canadiens. So a lot ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. And before we do any more of that, we do want to remind you that we are presented by Game Time. You don't have any more Sabre games to go to, but the playoff games just a short drive away. Toronto is only a quick 90-minute drive up the QEW, and you could get those tickets with the Game Time app, as well as, of course, we've got baseball. They've got baseball available to you, NBA playoffs. You could drive down to Cleveland. There's concerts here in the Buffalo area going on all the time downtown, and the weather's getting nice, so it's a great time to go out and experience some nice concerts, comedy shows, and whatnot. Game Time is the place for last-minute ticket deals. Forget planning months in advance. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the day of the event, and you get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. The Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will actually credit you 110% of the difference. It is the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. My favorite feature actually is when you're scrolling through the app and you're looking for where you want to sit. You don't even have to click on it to find this little view. They'll actually show you the view from your seat as you're looking through it. So whether or not you want to see how high up you are, or the angle, how steep the arena might be, it's all right there. It just exactly what you're going to be looking at when you're in your seat. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL. You get a $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, and my guest today, Hadi Kalakeche from DobberProspects, Director of North American Scouting. And we're talking Sabre prospects here, and we'll get to some NHL draft stuff, an early preview of the draft a little bit later on today's show. So we talked about Jiri Kulich. We talked about Matthew Savoie. How about some of the other Sabre prospects? You've been higher on Noah Ostlund, I feel like, than anyone I've heard. Yeah. Not to say I really hear anyone that's down on Ostlund, but you said the last time you were on that I think you may have called him the number one guy among that trio, Kulich and Savoie from last year's draft. Savoie turned it on at the end of the WHL season. We talked about him. Kulich set historic records. Do you still feel that strongly about Ostlund and his trajectory eventually being an impact NHLer?
In short, yes. But to add some nuance, there are some pathways to the NHL that I think there are some pathways for Ostlund, which I think will not lead to his ceiling. I feel like at his best, Ostlund will be the best of the three, but there are a lot of limiting factors that could prevent him from reaching that level. First and foremost, Djurgården's right now stuck in the Swedish second division. Yes, he's driving the bus on that team, but the level of competition is nowhere near what he's going to be facing in North America, right? So I feel like the sooner they get him overseas and the sooner they get him in the system itself, the better it's going to be for Ostlund in order for him to adapt the right way to the style of play he's going to be facing more regularly. It's not to say that the Allsvenskan, the second division in Sweden, is anything to crap on. I mean, they're a really, really good division, a really good league. He's facing men right now, and he's holding his own. He had a decent playoffs as well. The thing with Ostlund is a lot of his game is going to go through his brain. He's a very, very heady player. Yes, he's got that kind of shiftiness and elusiveness that I like to see in kind of forwards who are, average or smaller size. But the main thing with him is just how well he thinks the game. He sees the game 3-4 steps in advance, and I don't think that's going anywhere as he climbs the ranks. It's just a matter of making sure that his shiftiness, his elusiveness, his puck skills can keep up with that high-end brain that he has. So yeah, for me, Ostlund still remains kind of the guy I'm most high on in the Sabres system. And, that's saying something given how high I am on Kulich. I think that Kulich in the future is an almost definite top 6 winger. The skill set that he brings is tremendous. I just think that Ostlund has that added elusiveness and that added hockey sense, which For me, the main thing I look at with prospects is smarts. If you've got the smarts, you can work around a lot of your lackings. And Östlund's big lacking for me right now is his shot. It's not anywhere near NHL level.
Hmm.
Um, but there's a lot of elements of his game that remind me a bit of a Nicholas Backstrom, where he's just thinking the game 3 steps in advance. He's able to set up players effortlessly, and he's got really, really soft hands. So that I really like about him. Just a combination of skill, elusiveness, and smarts.
Hmm.
It's so rare to find in prospects.
What do you think for him? He would be a guy that would benefit from, I mean, at least 1 year in the AHL. No,
Definitely,
yeah,
100%. As good as the Swedish second division is, I think at least, if he were to spend next year in the SHL, or
yeah,
maybe the next 2 years in the SHL, maybe we talk about jumping him straight into the NHL after that if he performs well. But
yeah.
if we're talking about bringing him to North America next season, it's definitely going to be a year in the AHL.
And then how about Isak Rosen, who's been playing well in Rochester this year? I was actually a little surprised by that because he got no minutes in Sweden last year.
Yep.
And I mean, he's listed at less than 170 pounds. Like you even see it on the ice. He is small out there, but he moves well. So I've been impressed in the few times I was able to see Amherst hockey this year, and I'm driving down on Sunday to see him in the playoffs. So I'm excited to get a look at him as well. Especially since like he's not really, I mean, he doesn't have some of the headlines that Kulich does, or even Savoie down in the WHL. He kind of flies under the radar, I feel like. But does that doesn't, I guess for you, on what trajectory is he on? Like, is his development on the right path? And even though, guys that were drafted after him might be, especially Kulich, just maybe climbing above him a little bit.
Yeah. So Isak Rosen for me there's one big thing in his game is that before when he was drafted, I saw him mainly as a kind of pure scorer. He scored, a decent amount of goals and was involved in a lot of kind of finishing plays rather than kind of creating them, building up plays, setting it up. He's adapted and changed his game a lot since he's got to the AHL, which I like because it shows adaptability and kind of versatility. He's not a one-trick pony, and that was my big concern with him is that, if he's not scoring, what is he doing? And you saw it with him. I mean, especially at the World Juniors, he was so impressive for me at the World Juniors. Getting involved defensively, playmaking, transition play. He's one of the most fast and kind of dominant in terms of his processing speed players in this tournament. So it was really, really interesting to see him at the World Juniors and see what he's capable of against his age group, because he's a notch above the rest when he's playing against his age group. And even this year, for a guy this frail to be putting up 37 points in 66 games in the AHL, that's really, really impressive. It just adds to the fact that, he's definitely going to add some weight. He's not the type of guy who's going to stay frail. He's got a pretty average frame. He's a bit lanky. He seems small on the ice because of his posture. He's got a really kind of low to the ice posture, but if he keeps that while adding weight, it's going to be super tough to deal with on defense, because he's going to get under your hands. He's going to push you off. He's going to lower his center of gravity to kind of turn tighter and be quicker. I'm excited to see what Rosen can do with a couple, at least 10, 20 more pounds of weight added on his frame. That's going to be really interesting to see.
And then how about, before we get to the goaltending, to kind of open-ended, anyone else in the Sabres prospect pool that is not one of these former first-round picks that jumps off the page to you, whether it's, I mean, Lucas Rusak's a little bit older at this point. I think he's 23. Olivier Nadeau, I know, put up huge points in the queue, which I know you follow closely.
Yeah.
I've seen the numbers pop off the page with guys like Jake Richard. So I guess just open-ended. Like, is there anyone further down in the Sabres prospect pool that stands out to you?
Yeah, so Olivier Nadeau was a close second for me. I was really impressed with what I saw from him in Gatineau. I started following that team a lot after the trade deadline, and he's always stood out as the type of guy who's going to find open space, going to shoot the puck. He's going to work really, really hard off the puck as well. He's one of the kind of elements of Gatineau that makes him so dominant, rather than just kind of coasting on other teams, on some of his teammates' point totals. He's been really kind of driving the bus for them. But the main guy for me that's really stood out is Viktor Neuchev. He's been playing in the KHL this whole year, which is a feat in and of itself for a draft plus one player. 12 points in 57 games, which is pretty impressive as well. I feel like he's going to continue building up his game and working on improving his ability to play quickly. But when you watch him play, he's got one of the best shots from last year's draft. He was up there for me already. Just the accuracy, the velocity, and just the deceptiveness of his release as well. I think he's going to have no problem scoring in the pros as he moves forward. But he's also added some playmaking elements as well. He's diversified his game a bit like Isak Rosen, but kind of the opposite factor. Really kind of getting better at finding seams, at hanging onto the puck just a second longer to throw the opponents off and open up some lanes, that kind of thing. His progression's been pretty interesting, but he's always, for me, he's going to be that type of guy who's going to kind of play on the half wall and score some goals, a bit like Viktor Olofsson.
Yeah, we heard about Neuchev and Nikita Novikov. I believe both players' KHL contracts were expiring this month. So we've heard that, they might be trying to bring them over on entry-level deals to Rochester. So we'll see, because if they can get more minutes in Rochester, I think that's what the Sabres would like to have happen. But I guess we'll see where that ends up going with those two. And Neuchev, who was always a fun pick.
Yeah.
Just remembering his highlights. Like, I knew nothing about him as the third round prospect. Like, okay, what do we have here? Oh my God, look at the YouTube clips.
Yeah, no, it's ridiculous. His shot's insane. I can't wait to see that in North America. It's going to be really exciting to see.
Yeah. All right, quick time out, and then we come back. The wrap on the goaltending and the draft itself. Sabres could move up 10 spots. It's not likely, so I'm sure we'll talk more about what they're end up going to have at 13, but they could move up to 3. So we'll get to those before we run out of time here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. We're joined by Hadi Kalakeche on today's show to talk some prospects. We are presented by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit, and it is the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage on their app and look for the green check to know what part will fit for you or your money back, because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in time. You'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. So get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, final segment here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Who are you rooting for in the playoffs, by the way? I know neither of our teams made it, but...
I think the Bruins are going to... I don't like the Bruins for obvious reasons, Habs fan, but...
I was going to say, we're not rooting for the Bruins, right? I mean, we can think they're going to win.
I'm not rooting for them. I just think they're really going to win. But for me, I like an underdog story, so I've always got kind of a soft spot for the Maple Leafs. So.
Oh my God, come on! I do get that a little bit, and not gonna lie, I would love to see a Toronto-Boston series.
Oh goodness,
it's just so funny that they can't win a first round.
Hilarious.
I do kind of want to root for chaos and Toronto just plunge into the abyss of, is Austin Matthews gonna leave for 2 months? Yeah. So, all right, let's back to the Sabres in terms of the goalie prospects. We've not brought those up yet. They're kind of here now, right? Like Devon Levi, it was only 6 games, but he blew Sabre fans away. He really almost carried them into the playoffs. It came close. So, I mean, fans around here and media alike, myself, we're all talking about, could this guy be... It sounds crazy to just anoint him as he's the clear-cut number 1, but... a 1A, 1B situation with a veteran, or they have a tough decision, Hadi. So I'll pose it to you this way. The tough decision is Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was a nice prospect too, way more inconsistent, but he can't go to the AHL anymore. He's now waivers eligible. So they have to decide if Levi is going to be here, which sounds like he's going to. Do you go with 2 young goalies like that in a season where you got to make the playoffs? Or do you move on from Luukkonen and go with Levi? I guess what to you is the right outcome for the Sabres with this young goalie group?
I feel like a trade is pretty much inevitable. I think that either Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen or Topias Laine will kind of leave the system, because there's too many young goalies that are, kind of high end enough in order to perhaps one day become kind of starters. And obviously, a starter fight, having 2 guys that are good enough to be starters is always good. I don't think there's any harm in that, but like you said, 2 young goalies in a year that's kind of a make or break for the management team. I think that they're going to kind of go all in and trade for a goaltender that's going to be more of a veteran presence, be more of a mentor for a guy like Devon Levi.
Yeah.
If there's any chance that they can get UC Saros in Buffalo in order to kind of be the guy to guide and mentor Devon Levi towards the future starting role, that would be insane. Because I don't think there's a better mentor for Levi than Saros.
Yeah.
As an undersized goalie, I've always said this, but so many teams just do not, or kind of just refuse to draft undersized goaltenders. Anyone under 6'2" for them is an untouchable. Devon Levi has perfectly adapted to his lack of size, and you saw it in his game. The footwork is insane. The puck tracking is insane. His ability to just stay with any play, his athleticism, his side to side movement. He's not overcommitting. He's not undercommitting. Just perfectly tailored his game to his lack of size, and he's made it work so well. So for me, you've got a guy in Devon Levi who's got a really, really bright future, a guy who could be a starter down the line. I'm still absolutely astounded he slipped to the 7th round. I mean, that just speaks to the reticence of teams when it comes to smaller goaltenders, and I've never understood that because it's a competitive advantage. It's something you have to build adaptive skills around. Big goalies can get away with a lot more than small goalies. So when a small goalie is succeeding, he's doing something right. And throughout his stint with Northeastern, Devon Levi was just, he was so often Northeastern's best player. And I'm talking even back when they had that stacked defense with Jordan Harris, with Jaden Struble. He was still driving their bus. And still this year, before he signed for the Sabres, it was still so evident that he was their best player. For me, it's just a matter of, who's got the more upside. And for me, it's by far Devon Levi. I think that Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen has a future as a starter, but the upside with Levi is just so sky high. I'm so interested to see where he goes.
Yeah. So quickly on that, just to follow up, because we can get lost in the hype. Like Levi, how good he was in 6 games, and like the Jedi, stuff that he was doing like during TV timeouts where he's like meditating between games. Like people already fell in love with him. So to you, it doesn't sound crazy that like he could play half the games next year for the Sabres?
Oh, not at all. Okay. I feel like before the end of the season, he's established himself as a starter, as the starter, no matter who's kind of ahead of him in the pipeline. I think that you've really got a gem in Levi. I had my reservations because it's such a huge leap, and I've kind of been traumatized by Caden Primo, who's a goalie in the half system who also played for Northeastern, put up very similar numbers to Levi, and right now he's struggling a lot to even make the NHL. So I kind of had my reservations because it's such a huge leap, but in this short stint in the NHL, he's shown that he's not inconsistent at all. He's very capable of putting in the same exact effort, the same exact results on a nightly basis, and just generally keep up with the NHL mentally, because it's such a demanding game. It's such a demanding league mentally to spend 60 minutes on the ice with play happening that quickly around you. It takes a really solid mindset in order to be able to stick as a starter in the NHL as a netminder, and Levi's got that for sure.
And then finally, Hadi, before we let you go here, how about an early preview of the draft and kind of where the Sabres are slotted? But before actually about 13, the lottery will happen on May 8th, and there, it's a very low percentage chance. It's, what is it? It's 2% chance. And they can't get up to number 1. They could only move a max of 10 spots, which would be the 3rd pick. So if a miracle struck and they did win and move up 10 spots, I guess how significant would that, how valuable is that 3rd pick in this draft?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's a huge steep drop off after pick 5. I mean, not massive. I still think that up until pick 11, you're still getting kind of either a top pair defenseman, a potential type guy, or a top 6 forward, that kind of thing. But after 11, that's when it starts getting kind of, we'll kind of pick what we can get. So the difference between 13 and 3 in this draft is massive. It's the difference between a Matvei Michkov or a Leo Carlson or a Zach Benson and, a guy like Gavin Brindley or Luca Cagnoni or, Dalibor Dvorsky, one of those guys who are risky but also have upside. I think that would be a good pick for the Sabres, especially a guy like Gavin Brindley. He's an undersized winger, but he's a guy he reminds me a lot of Kulich in a lot of elements, but kind of just a playmaking version of him and a smaller version of him, where tremendous defensively. He's going to cover for your defenseman a lot. He's going to cover a lot of the mistakes that your defensemen make, but at the same time, he's able to contribute offensively. Whereas a 3rd overall, if you get Matvei Michkov, you're laughing. I know he's 3 years away from making the NHL. I don't care. You wait that long. He's that skilled. So it's a huge difference for me.
And there's no are there any right shot defensemen in this draft? Do they just not exist anymore? Where
Yeah,
are
they
all the
do.
right shot defensemen?
They do. David Reinbacher, he's gonna go top 10, maybe even top 8. For sure. I don't think he's worth that. He's 20th on my board. He's a weird guy. I have a lot of trouble not seeing him make a second pair in the NHL, but I also have a lot of trouble seeing him become anything more than that. He's kind of just a surefire kind of second pair guy, which it depends on how much you value that. But yeah, I've got him in like my late teens, early 20s. But the guy I'm looking at, if I'm the Sabres and I'm looking for a right shot defenseman, is Axel Sandin Pellikka for sure. The highest upside defenseman in this draft. He's one of those kind of John Klingberg types. Really smart, really offensively skilled. Never misses a breakout pass. Really good in transition play. He does have his defensive limitations, but it's not as overblown as people seem to kind of think. I've seen him outside of the 20s. I don't understand it. For me, he's second behind Dmitry Simashev, but Simashev is a left-handed defenseman, but 6'4", about the same offensive upside, that kind of thing. But for me, if I'm looking for a right shot defenseman, it's definitely Axel Sandin Pellikka.
All of Montreal going to be on edge on May 8th, I'm assuming, with that 8.5%.
Yup. Let's hope for something good, but I feel like the Habs are just going to end up where they're supposed to be at 5th overall, and they'll pick David Reinbacher, and I'll be disappointed, but it is what it is.
No offense, but I will definitely be rooting for him to not be in the Sabres division. So, I don't want him going to Arizona and playing in front of 5,000 people, but maybe like San Jose or something. Let's just get him out of our way.
For sure.
All right. At Hadi K_scouting, if you want to follow him on Twitter, check out his stuff. Great stuff at DobberProspects. And he's got his own YouTube channel. You can find all that on his Twitter as well. So Hadi, I appreciate you coming on, man. And I'm sure I'll try to get you on before the draft again in a couple months. So
for sure. Let's talk prospects. Always excited to do that.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
No problem.
All right, and this has been the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. We'll talk more about the Amherst playoffs coming up next, but we've got our exit interviews series coming up next, so we'll get through some of the forwards, Tage Thompson, and whatnot. So come back tomorrow for Locked On Sabres. Joe DiBiase, thanks for making us your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.